On our daughter's wedding day, my husband and I saw our picture taped to the gate with a sign that read, "This pair not allowed." We quietly turned the car around and drove home. 3 hours later, she realized her wedding had ended the exact moment we pulled back into our driveway. Hello, dear listeners. Before I begin telling you this difficult story from my life, I ask that you please support our channel. Subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and tell us in the comments what city you're listening from. It truly means a lot to us. And now, enjoy the story. That morning, I woke up not to the sound of my alarm clock, but to silence. You know that special ringing quiet that comes before a storm or a huge celebration? For me, this day was both. I lay there for a few minutes, staring up at the ceiling of our faded brick apartment, mentally running through the checklist I'd kept in my head for the past 6 months. Not a shopping list, no. This was the score for the most complicated symphony, and I was the conductor, even while remaining backstage. The pheasants. They were supposed to arrive at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning from a private farm in rural Virginia. I personally checked the quality of the birds and personally called the owner to remind him this was for my only daughter. The linen tablecloths, vintage, cream-colored, with delicate French hand embroidery. They were brought out of storage only because of my name. The florals, no tacky roses, just wild meadow flowers paired with rare orchids, exactly the way Camille wanted. Everything was measured to the millimeter, to the second, to the last breath. I got up and walked to the window. The city was just starting to stir, but I could already smell success. I had given 40 years of my life to the restaurant business, 40 years of feeding politicians, celebrities, and billionaires, always remaining the strict woman in a black suit who made sure the soup didn't get cold and the glasses sparkled. And all those years, I put away every single dime, denying myself vacations, a new winter coat, or home repairs, all for this one day. The day my Camille would become a princess. Not like me, a workhorse who always smelled faintly of the kitchen, but a real lady. Earl was already up. He sat on the kitchen chair, fully dressed, sipping tea. His old gray suit was impeccably pressed, and his white shirt was crisp. He looked solemn and a little scared. "Vivian," he asked quietly, without lifting his eyes from his mug, "are you sure we fit in? The Vances, they're, well, you know, blue bloods, even if they're broke." I walked over to my husband and placed my hand on his shoulder. I could feel his muscles tense. "Earl," I said, "stop it. We don't just fit in. We are the parents of the bride, and we paid for this entire reception. Every single fork, every napkin there is our sweat and our effort. The Vances are giving her a name, but we gave her life. Remember that." I put on my best dress, a structured, dark chocolate-colored dress, long and covering my knees. No excesses, just a simple brooch pinned to the lapel of my jacket. We weren't trying to look richer than we were. Our wealth was in something else, in our dignity and in the fact that we had made the impossible possible for our little girl. We went down to our car. Our old, faithful Buick LeSabre looked humble compared to the fleet of luxury cars that must already be rolling into the mansion. But the interior was spotless, and Earl drove so carefully, as if he were transporting a crystal vase. The drive out of the city took about an hour. We barely spoke, each lost in our own thoughts. I remembered negotiating with Frank Delgado, an old friend and the owner of that luxurious historic Hudson Valley mansion by the river. He initially grumbled about being booked solid for 2 years. But when he heard it was my Camille getting married, he just waved his hand. "For you, Vivian, I'd pull the moon out of the sky. Take the hall for Saturday. We'll settle up later, for old time's sake." Camille, of course, told the groom that these were her connections, that she had practically bought the property. I didn't correct her. Let her take pride in it. The result was what mattered. The wrought iron gates of the mansion came into view in the distance. My heart started to beat faster. I expected to see the gates wide open, decorated with flowers, smiling valets, and music drifting from the lawn. I had personally approved the guest arrival scenario, but the gates were closed. Earl slowed down, frowning in confusion. "Vivian, why are they shut? Maybe we're early, or maybe they made a different entrance." "No, the entrance is only here," I replied, feeling a chill start to creep inside me. Drive closer." 2 security guards stood at the massive iron gates. They weren't Frank's people. I knew every member of the estate's staff, every guard, every gardener. These 2 were strangers, wearing black uniforms without insignia, their faces stone-cold and impassive. They stood with their feet planted wide apart, as if guarding a military installation rather than a wedding. We pulled up right next to them. Earl shut off the engine. The silence in the car became thick. Taped crudely with duct tape right across the central, elegant iron scrollwork of the gate was a large, laminated, poster-sized printout. I squinted. My vision isn't what it used to be, but I got the gist immediately. It was a photograph. Our photograph. Earl's and mine. The very one I had sent Camille in a text message only a week ago. We were sitting on our porch, tired after weeding the garden, wearing simple t-shirts, laughing over mugs of iced tea. It was a very personal, warm, homey picture that I had sent with the caption, "Love you, sweetheart. Can't wait for Saturday." Now that photo was defaced. Across our smiling faces was a thick, angry red stamp. "This pair not allowed. Security threat. Entry prohibited." The words hit me harder than a slap. The air caught in my throat. I heard Earl gasp convulsively. "Vivian," his voice dropped to a whisper. "What is this? Is it some kind of joke? A contest?" I couldn't answer. I just stared at my smile in the photo, crossed out with a red X. This wasn't just a no. This was a public renunciation. We had been displayed as criminals, as dirty vagrants who shouldn't be let across the threshold of a respectable home. And the most terrifying thing, she had given them the photo. No one else had that shot. One of the guards lazily approached the car, not even bothering to bend down to the window. He just tapped his baton on the hood and gestured for us to turn around. "Time to go." My gaze slowly traveled upward, past the gates, to where the facade of the mansion was visible through the linden trees. There, on the second floor, was a balcony overlooking the driveway, and I saw her. Camille stood at the railing. She was wearing that dress, the one we had spent all our savings on for the last 5 years. The finest lace, 1,000 pearls. She looked magnificent. Next to her stood a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, Alberta Vance, the groom's mother. I expected my daughter to see us, to see that shameful sign, and rush out, start yelling at the security guards, tearing the filth down. I waited for a look of panic, of confusion. But Camille was smiling. She was looking right at our car. She saw us. She saw the sign. And there was not a trace of embarrassment on her face. On the contrary, it was a smile of relief. She said something to her mother-in-law, pointing at us with an elegant movement, and Alberta nodded approvingly, covering her mouth with a lace handkerchief to hide a giggle. And then my daughter, my Camille, for whom I'd stood over a stove for 40 years, raised a glass of champagne. She saluted us. Or rather, she was toasting the fact that the problem of having common parents had been solved so efficiently, to the fact that we wouldn't be an eyesore to her aristocratic guests with our cheap suits and plain faces. She took a sip and turned away, returning to the party we paid for. I didn't cry. Tears are just water. But in that second, everything in me froze, hardening into dry, sharp ice. It was a strange feeling, not pain, but a sudden absolute clarity. It was as if someone had wiped condensation from a window, and the world outside wasn't festive and bright, but gray and sickeningly sharp. I put my hand on my husband's forearm. Beneath the thin fabric of his jacket, his muscles were vibrating with a small, wretched tremble. He looked at his daughters retreating back, at the closing balcony doors, and his face aged right before my eyes. The wrinkles deepened, as if carved by a knife. "Earl," I said softly. My voice was steady, like the beat of a metronome. "Turn around." He blinked, tearing his gaze away from the mansion with effort. "Vivian, but what about... Maybe we should call someone? Maybe it's a mistake?" "There is no mistake." I squeezed his arm a little harder, pulling him back to reality. "We weren't invited. We were put out. Let's go home." Earl inhaled convulsively, shifted into drive, and our Buick LeSabre slowly traced an arc in the gravel before the closed gates. The guards didn't even look after us. To them, we were just trash that the wind had swept off the road. The drive back was agonizing. We traveled in complete silence. The radio was off. Earl stared straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I stared out the side window at the blurring trees and the sun-drenched fields, which now seemed fake to me, like the gilt on cheap jewelry. One thought kept spinning in my head. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. The sign was laminated. The security guards were briefed. Camille had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. While I was choosing napkins, while Earl was counting out his retirement savings to pay for the orchestra, she already knew we wouldn't be there. We were only needed as a wallet to be discarded the moment it emptied. She wasn't just ashamed of us, she had annulled us. Somewhere halfway back to the city, Earl suddenly choked back a sob, a single short, dry sound. "Why, Viv?" he asked, using the nickname he'd only called me when we were young. We did everything for her." "Don't ask," I cut him off. Pity was dangerous right now. If I started pitying him or myself, I would shatter, and I needed to remain whole. I needed to act. I opened my handbag, my old worn leather bag. At the bottom, under a pack of tissues and my glasses case, lay an item I hadn't taken out in maybe 2 years, my little black book. It was a thick notebook bound in faux leather, swollen with tucked-in business cards and scribbled notes. My entire life was in it. 40 years of work. The phone numbers of the best caterers, restaurant owners, chefs, florists, and of course the maitre d's. That book held more than just contacts. It held debts. People I had helped start their careers, people I had saved from being fired. People who knew that if Vivian Carmichael called, the matter was serious. I flipped through the pages, looking for the letter P. Paul. He was the head steward at the wedding right now, the senior floor manager overseeing every move the waiters made. 15 years ago, I had hired him, a college kid, to wash dishes in the Waldorf Astoria's banquet hall. I taught him everything: how to uncork wine without spilling a drop, how to calm a drunk guest, how to hold your back straight even when you're collapsing from exhaustion. He used to call me Mama Vivian. I dialed the number. The phone rang long and slow. I imagined the hustle and bustle at the mansion, the guests seating themselves, anticipating the first toast. "Hello, Vivian Carmichael." Paul's voice was breathless but cheerful. "Are you on your way? We're running a little behind with the seating chart. Alberta Vance caused a scene about the place cards, but I fixed it all. We're just waiting for you and Earl." I looked at the road. We were entering the city limits. The gray brick apartment complexes surrounded us, pulling us back into our familiar world. "Paul, listen to me carefully," I interrupted him. My tone was the same one I used to use when scolding him for dirty cuffs, icy, and brooking no argument. "We won't be coming." "What?" He was bewildered. "What do you mean you won't come? Did something happen? Did the car break down? I'll send a driver right now." "No, Paul. Listen and don't interrupt. The sponsor has left the project." "What? Which sponsor?" He didn't understand. He was still in party mode. "Me," I said harshly. "I am the sponsor of this banquet. I am the client. I am revoking my presence and my obligations." Silence hung in the receiver. I could hear the background sounds of the party. Laughter, glasses clinking, the distant sound of a violin. That world only existed because I paid for it. "Vivian Carmichael." Paul's voice wavered. "I don't understand." He was a smart boy. He was starting to get it. "Do you remember Section 4.2 in our standard service contract? The one we drafted for corporate clients? Client refusal of presence," he muttered automatically. "Exactly. In the event of the client's absence from the event, the service format changes. Paul, switch the banquet to commercial mode." "But Vivian Carmichael, there are 200 people. There's the caviar, the pheasants, the wine alone. $8,000 worth is already open." "Starting this second," I enunciated every word, looking at my hands resting calmly on my lap. "Everything served on the tables must be paid for on the spot. The sponsor is gone. The open bar is over. Kitchen, stop. Alcohol, stop. Any order goes through the register only." "They'll kill me," Paul whispered, horror in his voice. "They won't kill you," I assured him. "You're just doing your job. Tell them the client's account has been frozen." "And Paul." The wine from the special reserve. The cases I brought personally yesterday. Lock the cellar. Put the key in your pocket. That is my private property, not part of the catering." "Understood," he replied in a different tone, the tone of a professional who had received a command in a crisis. "Switching to cash and carry mode. Should I announce it to the guests?" "No, let the surprise be gradual. Start with the servers. Have them stop circulating the appetizers." I pressed the end call button. The phone screen went dark. I put it back in my purse and snapped the clasp shut with a loud click. Earl looked at me. His eyes held fear mixed with admiration. "What did you do, Vivian?" "I just stopped being a mother, Earl," I answered, staring ahead at the gray asphalt. "And I became who they think I am, a service provider. And service providers, as we know, only work for money." The phone in my bag didn't ring. Not yet. I knew it would take another 20 minutes before the wave from the stone I'd thrown into the water reached the shore. Meanwhile, at Frank Delgado's mansion, as I had predicted, a very different scene was unfolding. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but 40 years of experience allowed me to reconstruct the events with perfect timing. I knew the rhythm of a banquet. I knew how the room breathed. The guests had taken their seats at tables set up in the garden under the canopy of ancient trees. A pristine white tent shielded them from the sun. A light breeze stirred the edges of the tablecloths. The orchestra played something light and unobtrusive, Vivaldi or Mozart. Camille was seated at the head table next to Julian. She was glowing. She felt like a queen who had successfully executed a palace coup. Her parents were gone. The embarrassment was eliminated. Around her were only her people, the high society folk she longed to be a part of. Alberta Vance, adjusting her massive necklace, must have tapped her fork against her glass already, demanding attention for the first toast. But something went wrong. The waiters, my boys and girls, trained to automatic perfection, should have been gliding silently between the tables right now, pouring champagne and offering canapes with caviar. But they were moving differently. Strange, jerky. They froze. Paul, having received my call, didn't waste any time. He crossed the floor with a brisk stride, issuing short commands into his earpiece on the fly. The senior servers nodded, their faces turning serious. The smiles vanished. Trays of appetizers that had already been lifted were lowered back onto the side tables. "Excuse me, ma'am," a young server said politely but firmly, pulling a bottle of expensive champagne right out from under the nose of Julian's portly uncle, who was reaching for it. Technical pause. The music abruptly stopped. The violinist lowered his bow, looking confusedly at the conductor, to whom someone had whispered something. In the silence that followed, the clinking of cutlery sounded especially loud and out of place. Camille frowned. She looked around, searching for Paul. "Hey!" she called out, snapping her fingers. That gesture always irritated me. You snap your fingers for a dog, not a maitre d'. "Why is the music silent? Where is the wine? Our guests have empty glasses." Paul approached the head table. He was immaculate in his tuxedo, but the servility Camille was used to seeing was gone from his eyes. He looked at her the way you look at a customer whose credit card has just been declined. "Madam," he said dryly, "not Camille or Mrs. Vance, but a flat, impersonal madam. We've encountered a difficulty accessing the alcohol reserve." "What difficulties?" Alberta Vance cut in, her nostrils flaring in anger. "You can't open a bottle. It's crystal. We paid for it." "I'm afraid not," Paul replied calmly. "The wine cellar and the premium alcohol are the private property of the event's sponsor. As the sponsor is not on the premises and has not authorized the reserve to be opened, access is sealed. I have the key, but I am not authorized to use it without the owner's direct command." Camille turned pale. The patches of blush on her cheeks turned bright red. "What sponsor? What are you talking about? This is my wedding. I'm the hostess. Pour the wine immediately." "Your wedding is unquestionable, madam," Paul agreed, a barely perceptible hint of irony in his voice. "But the service contract was not signed by you, and the premium items were not paid for by you." The crowd started whispering. Guests began looking at each other. Someone nervously chuckled. Julian, the groom, sat with his head hunched between his shoulders, fidgeting with his napkin. He looked like he wanted to disappear. "This is outrageous!" Alberta Vance shrieked. She stood up, knocking over her chair. "I will complain. I will ruin your company. We demand service. We are hungry after all. Where is the first course? Where are the pheasants?" Paul didn't even blink. He took a thin sheet of paper and a pen from the folder he held under his arm. "The kitchen is ready to continue working," he said, extending the sheet to the mother-in-law. "But due to the lack of payment confirmation from the main client, we have switched to a direct payment system." Alberta Vance snatched the paper. Her eyes widened. "What is this?" "This is the invoice for the first hour of site rental and the service fee for the aperitifs," Paul explained loudly so the nearest tables could hear. "Since the account holder has left the premises, according to the force majeure clause of the contract, payment is transferred to the organizers present, that is, to you. The amount due is $4,000. Payment is required now, please. Card or cash?" The silence in the garden became absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. $4,000 for 1 hour. And this was only the beginning. Camille jumped up, gasping for air like a fish thrown onto the bank. "You're lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Mom paid for everything, everything. You're just trying to extort money. I'll call the police." "Call them," Paul shrugged indifferently. "But first, I'd recommend calling your mother, if she takes the phone. Until the invoice is paid, service is suspended. Servers, exit the hall." At his signal, as if by magic, the entire staff, 30 people in white gloves, simultaneously turned and headed for the exit of the tent. They left silently, with dignity, leaving the guests alone with empty plates and locked bottles. It was a terrifying sight for high society, to be left without servants, without food, left alone with their own helplessness. I imagined Alberta Vance's face at that moment. She was looking at the bill as if it were a death sentence. Her hands were shaking. She glanced at her son, Julian, seeking support, but he only lowered his head further. In our car, which was just pulling up to our building, Earl suddenly broke the silence. "They're going to start calling now, Viv. What are we going to say?" I looked at my phone screen. The first call. Daughter. The photo of a laughing Camille on the screensaver. "Nothing," I replied, swiping my finger across the screen and tapping decline. "We won't say anything. Today is our day off." I powered the phone completely down. The screen went dark, reflecting my calm, tired face. We were almost home, but I knew the real storm was still ahead. After all, I had only tugged on one thread, and I still held the entire spool in my hands. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, letting us back into the silence of our apartment. Here in the hallway, it smelled of old books and dried mint, the scent of our real life, the one Camille had tried so hard to erase. Earl and I walked in without taking off our shoes, like guests in our own home. He sank onto the ottoman in the entryway, slumping, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake again, but this time, silently. "Viv," his voice was muffled beneath his palms. Were we too cruel? Maybe we should have just left and that was it. Left them the food. There are people there, guests. I took off my jacket and carefully hung it on a hanger. My movements were slow, automatic. "Cruel?" I repeated, walking into the kitchen and putting the kettle on the stove. "Earl, cruel is taping your parents' picture to a gate with security threat written over it. Cruel is being ashamed of your father's hands, which worked 2 shifts to pay for tutors. We're just restoring balance." The kettle started to whistle. I took out 2 mugs, our favorites, the ones with tiny chips that Camille always suggested we throw out. "But the mansion," Earl raised his eyes to me, full of confusion. "Camille told everyone it was her dowry, that we bought it for her." I froze, the jar of tea leaves in my hands. There it was, the core of the lie. "She said a lot of things," I said quietly. "She told the Vances that we gave her the estate, that the title was in her name." Earl's face went white. "Lord, if they find out, they'll find out." I tossed a pinch of tea into the pot. "Right now, they will." I walked over to the landline phone hanging on the wall. My cell was off, but only one important person knew this number: Frank Delgado. I dialed his private number. The rings were short and sharp. "Yeah!" A familiar bass voice snapped into the receiver. Frank was not in a good mood. The news from Paul must have reached him already. "Frank, it's Vivian." A pause hung on the other end. Then Frank's voice softened, but a hidden fury still boiled beneath it. "Vivian, Paul called me. He told me you shut down the banquet. He told me about the sign." "Yes," I simply answered. "Damn it, Viv." The word was crude, but it carried so much sympathy that my eyes stung. I would have thrown them out myself if I'd known. "Vivian, you know, I thought it was your whim, that you decided not to show up so you wouldn't embarrass them." "I know, Frank, I don't blame you. But now, listen to me." "Go ahead." "Camille told the Vances that the mansion is her property. My wedding gift, my mansion." A sound like a growl came through the phone. "She what? She said it was her house, my family's home?" "Yes, and right now they're there, convinced they're on their own land." "Oh, that brat!" Frank coughed in outrage. "Vivian, do you know what that means?" "I do." I looked out the window at the gray courtyard. The rental contract was in my name. It includes a clause about the presence of an authorized representative. I am not there. Therefore, the contract is invalid. Frank finished for me. His voice was turning to steel. "The insurance is void. Any damage, any injury, that's my personal liability, and I have 200 drunk clowns on the property. No, Vivian, this won't stand. This isn't a wedding anymore. This is criminal trespassing on private property. Do what you have to do, Frank. The protocol is the protocol." "I'm coming out there," he barked shortly, "and I'm bringing the dogs." He hung up. I slowly set the receiver back down on the cradle. At that moment, chaos reigned at Frank Delgado's estate. Guests, abandoned by the servers, were starting to rummage through the tables for food themselves. Alberta Vance, red with anger, was screaming at a terrified Julian, demanding he deal with these commoners. Camille was sobbing, smearing her mascara, trying to call anyone, but the signal naturally was poor. The thick walls of the old mansion blocked the reception. Suddenly the lights went out. It was instantaneous. The huge crystal chandeliers in the tent, the strings of lights wrapped around the trees, the powerful floodlights illuminating the mansion's facade. Everything went dark at once. The music, which was still playing from someone's portable speaker, choked. Darkness fell. Only the moon and the dim screens of cell phones lit up the fear-twisted faces of the guests. "What is happening?" shrieked some aunt in a feathered hat. "Are we in a cave?" Then the fountain stopped. The sound of water, which had created a pleasant background noise, vanished, replaced by an ominous silence in which only the heavy breathing of 200 people could be heard. And then they heard the barking. Deep, guttural, rolling barks from two massive Dobermans. Out of the darkness of the park, cutting through the gloom with a powerful flashlight beam, walked Frank Delgado. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing an old camouflage jacket and heavy boots. On leashes, he held the two dogs, each the size of a small calf. The crowd recoiled. Women screamed. Men who had been pretending to be brave a minute ago backed away, knocking over chairs. Frank stopped in the center of the grounds, shining his flashlight beam onto the newlyweds' table. Camille squeezed her eyes shut against the bright light. "Who's in charge?" Frank roared. His voice, without a microphone, cut through the noise of the crowd. Julian tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. Alberta Vance, shielding herself with her son, yelled, "What do you think you're doing? This is private property. We're calling the police. Get those dogs away." Frank smirked. In the light of the flashlight, his smile looked chilling. "Private property?" he repeated mockingly. "That's right. This is my private property. And who are you?" "This is my daughter-in-law's home," Alberta declared, pointing a finger at Camille. "She's the owner." Frank moved the beam of light to Camille. She was huddled into a ball, shaking. "Is that right?" he asked gently, the way a python asks a rabbit. "Camille, sweetheart, tell them. Tell them whose house this is." Camille was silent. She couldn't squeeze out a word. "Speak!" Frank yelled, and the dogs backed him up with a growl. It's a rental," she whispered, barely audible. "Louder!" Frank demanded. "It's a rental!" she screamed, breaking into hysterics. "We're just renting it. It's not my house." The crowd gasped. Alberta Vance froze, her mouth open. She slowly turned to her daughter-in-law. "What?" she hissed. You lied this whole time?" "The rental contract is terminated," Frank announced, not giving them time to react. "Due to a gross violation of terms and the absence of the contact person. You have 30 minutes to get off my property. In 30 minutes, I'm letting the dogs off the leash. Time starts now." He ostentatiously checked his watch. The panic that gripped the guests was indescribable. People grabbed their purses, shoved each other, ran toward their cars, shining their phones at the ground. The aristocrats forgot their manners. They pushed each other in the narrow path, swearing and cursing the wedding, the groom, and the bride. In the chaos, Julian grabbed Camille by the arm, not gently, like a lover, but painfully enough to bruise. "You lied?" he yelled in her face, spitting. "You said the house was yours, that your parents have millions." I wanted it to be better," Camille cried. "I thought Mom would pay. She always pays." "Idiot." Julian shoved her so hard she fell onto the grass, staining her precious dress. "We can't pay, don't you get it? We don't have any money, not a single penny. We are broke." Camille looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Broke? But Mama Alberta talked about a French estate, about stocks." Julian laughed hysterically, glancing at the fleeing guests. "The estate? Sold 5 years ago. The stocks? Worthless. We owe the bank so much you couldn't pay it off in your lifetime. We only married you for your parents' money? We thought they would save us." The words hung in the air, heavy as a tombstone. Camille sat on the ground, in the dirt, in the dark, under the barking of the dogs, and looked at the man she had called her husband half an hour ago. Her fairy tale didn't just end, it turned into a horror movie. And the most terrifying thing was that there was no one coming to save her. Mom wouldn't come. Mom had turned off her phone. Julian's words still rang in the air, mixing with Frank's dogs barking. "We only married you for your parents' money." Camille sat on the grass, not attempting to get up. The mud had already soaked into the hem of her dress, turning the delicate embroidery into a gray mess. But she didn't notice. She looked at her husband, pale, twitchy, his face contorted with malice, and saw him for the first time. Not a prince from an old family, but a cornered, pathetic gambler whose bet hadn't paid off. "What did you say?" she whispered. Her lips barely moved. "Are you deaf?" Alberta Vance shrieked, looming over her like a vulture. Her hat had slipped to the side, giving her a crazed look. "We're ruined! Your father, that cook? We thought he had a chain of restaurants. You said he was the king of banquets. We were counting on your dowry to pay off Julian's debts. And now what? We're being kicked out like dogs. And that bill, who's going to pay?" Camille tried to stand, leaning her hand on the ground. "But you're the Vances, the family crest, the history." "You can't eat history," Julian roared. He grabbed an unfinished bottle of wine from the table, which someone had left in their haste, and took a greedy swig right from the neck. A red stream ran down his chin onto his pristine white shirt. "My father lost everything gambling 10 years ago. We live on credit. We mortgaged the condo to buy me this suit and this ring. We thought your parents were a gold mine. Silent, hard-working suckers who would give everything for their daughter's happiness." He hurled the bottle into the bushes. The sound of breaking glass made Camille flinch. "And you?" Julian jabbed his finger at her. "You turned out to be just as worthless as us. A pauper, a liar, my mansion, my catering. Ugh!" Almost no one was left around them. The last guests, stumbling in the darkness, were running toward the gates, where their cars were creating a gigantic traffic jam. No one wanted to witness the shame. No one wanted to pay the bills. The fairy tale of the rich heiress and the noble aristocrat had burst, splattering mud on everyone nearby. Frank Delgado stood slightly apart, arms crossed. The dogs at his feet had quieted, sensing that the threat had passed. Only human rot remained. He didn't intervene. He gave them time to destroy each other. "You have 10 minutes left," he said loudly, looking at his watch. "Then I'm locking the gates. Anyone who doesn't make it is sleeping in the woods." Alberta Vance grabbed her son's arm. "Julian, let's go. We have to leave. We still have to deal with the bank." "And her?" Julian gestured to Camille, who was still sitting on the ground, hugging her knees. "Let her rot here," the mother-in-law threw over her shoulder. "She lied to us. She ruined our lives." They turned and walked quickly toward the exit, without a single backward glance. Camille was left alone, in the dark, in the dirt, in a silence broken only by the sound of receding cars. She slowly got up. Her legs were shaking. The dress, heavy with mud and tears, weighed her down. She looked around, empty tables, overturned chairs, broken glasses, the ruins of her ambition. And suddenly, she understood. My parents, they knew. Mom knew. She snatched up her phone. Her trembling fingers dialed the number. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable." She screamed. It was a scream not of pain, but of rage. She hurled the phone onto the grass, then immediately grabbed it again. She had to get to them. She had to make them fix everything. Mom always fixed everything. Mom always found a way out. Mom couldn't leave her like this. She ran toward the exit, barefoot on the gravel, having lost her high heels in the scramble, not feeling the pain. She burst through the gates and saw a taxi dropping off a late arrival. A photographer, apparently, who was just showing up now. "Stop!" she screamed, throwing herself toward the car. "Take me to the city, immediately!" The driver looked nervously at the disheveled woman in the dirty wedding dress. "I'll pay!" she cried hysterically, yanking the door handle. "Double fare, triple! Just get me out of here!" She gave the address, our address. While Camille sped toward the city, Earl and I sat in our kitchen. The kettle had long since gone cold, but we hadn't touched our mugs. Earl was looking out the dark window. "Viv," he said softly, "you know Julian. He's a gambler. I overheard his father mention debts at the engagement party, but I thought, business is business, credit is credit." I nodded. "I heard it too. But I didn't just hear it, Earl. I checked." He looked at me in surprise. "You checked?" "Of course. The first time Camille brought him around, I called a friend of mine at the bank, the one whose son's wedding I organized last year. I asked her to run a background check on the Vance name. And? Blacklisted." I sighed. "Their credit history is ruined. Assets seized. They are bankrupt, Earl. Officially bankrupt. They were looking for a life raft and found our daughter. And you kept silent." There was not resentment in my husband's voice, but astonishment at my composure. I tried to tell her. "Remember a month ago when I brought up the prenuptial agreement about checking their assets?" Earl looked down. "She said you were meddling, that you were jealous of her happiness and the nobility of her fiancé." "Exactly." She didn't want to hear it. She was blinded by the luster of their name and her fantasies. If I had shown her the documents, she would have accused me of forging them. She had to see it herself. "See them eat each other alive," Earl concluded. "Yes, it's a cruel lesson, but it's the only one she'll ever learn." The doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, demanding, prolonged. Someone was leaning on the button and not letting go. We exchanged glances. "It started," I said, getting up from the chair. I smoothed down my house dress, ran a hand through my hair. I was ready. "I'll get it." Earl also stood, but I stopped him with a gesture. "No, sit. This is my conversation." I approached the door. I could see Camille's distorted face through the peephole. She was alone. Julian and his mother must have fallen behind or gone somewhere else to lick their wounds, but I knew they would come too. Greed would bring them here. I didn't open the door right away. I put the security chain on first, then turned the lock. The door opened 5 inches. "Mom!" Camille shoved her shoulder into the gap, trying to widen the space, but the chain tautened with a clang of steel. "Mom, open up! Let me in!" She looked awful. Mascara ran down her cheeks in black streaks, her hair was matted, her dress was torn, but there was no remorse in her eyes. There was only fear and entitlement. "Mom, do you know what happened out there?" she screamed, seeing my calm face in the doorway. "Frank let the dogs loose. The guests ran off. Julian dumped me. They're bankrupt, Mom. They're poor." "I know," I replied calmly. Camille froze. She stopped pushing on the door and stared at me through the gap. You knew?" "Yes. And you let it happen?" Hysteria flared in her voice again. "You knew and stayed silent? You ruined my life on purpose." "I didn't ruin your life, Camille. I simply stopped paying for your illusions." At that moment, the elevator noise sounded in the hallway. The door slid open, and Julian and Alberta Vance rushed out. They looked no better than Camille, disheveled and out of breath. They had apparently decided they had nothing to lose and had come to demand compensation. "There they are!" Alberta shrieked, seeing me in the doorway. "The fraudsters, open up! We demand an explanation! We demand our money! You humiliated us!" Julian rushed to the door and tried to yank the handle, but the chain held firm. "You owe us!" he screamed. "You promised a dowry! Where is the money? Where is the mansion? We'll sue you for fraud!" I looked at this circus of freaks. My daughter, my son-in-law, his mother. 3 greedy mouths that had been ready to tear each other's throats out, now united against a common enemy. "Leave," I said quietly, but loud enough for them to fall silent. "There is nothing here for you." "We won't leave," Camille squealed. "Mom, let me come home. I feel sick. I'm pregnant." Silence fell in the hallway. Julian froze with his mouth open. Alberta squinted. "Pregnant?" Earl whispered, coming up behind me and placing his hand on my shoulder. "Is it true?" "Yes!" Camille nodded frantically, grasping at the last straw. "Yes, Dad. You're going to have a grandson. You can't kick your pregnant daughter into the street. Julian, tell them." Julian, instantly reoriented, nodded. Yes, it's the heir. You are obligated to secure his future. Stress is dangerous for the baby. Open the door, now." I looked at my daughter. In her eyes was the hope that this lie would work, that the sacred word grandson would melt our hearts and we would open our wallets again. I gave a sad smile. "Wait here," I said, and closed the door in their faces. "Vivian, what are you doing?" Earl whispered. "Is she telling the truth?" "No, Earl." I walked into the room to my desk. "She's not pregnant, and I'll prove it to them right now." I opened the document drawer. On top lay an envelope from a private clinic. It had arrived 3 days ago at our address because Camille was still officially registered here and had used this address for correspondence on her form. She'd simply forgotten to pick it up in the scramble of wedding preparations. I took the envelope, returned to the door, and opened it again on the chain. The trio was still there, awaiting their triumph. "Here," I pushed the envelope through the gap. "Read this, sweetheart. It came for you on Tuesday." Camille snatched the envelope and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the lines. Her face turned ashen. "What does it say?" Alberta asked impatiently, snatching the paper from her daughter-in-law's hands. She read aloud, with emphasis. "Dear Camille, a reminder of your required follow-up appointment regarding the installation of a long-term contraceptive implant. Effective period, 3 years. Installation date, 1 month ago." Alberta slowly raised her eyes to Camille. "An implant? A month ago?" Julian backed away from his wife as if she were infected. You got an IUD? But we were trying. You said you wanted children." It's a mistake," Camille stammered, but the lie was written across her face in enormous letters. "There is no mistake," I said from behind the door. "You are not pregnant, Camille, and you never planned to be. You just wanted to secure your position in their family and stall for time." "You little tramp!" Alberta roared and swung her purse at Camille. I slammed the door shut, cutting off their screams. The lock clicked. This time it clicked shut, forever. The screams outside the door didn't stop, but now the tone had changed. If before it was a unified chorus of demands directed at us, now that chorus disintegrated into a high-pitched solo of mutual accusations. I could hear Alberta cursing the barren liar, Julian whining something about lost time, and Camille, choking on her tears, trying to justify herself. But her voice was drowning in their hatred. I leaned my back against the cool metal door and closed my eyes. Earl stood beside me, pale, his fists clenched. "An implant," he whispered, shaking his head. "She even lied to us about grandchildren. Viv, remember last week when she was choosing names? If it's a boy, we'll name him after Grandpa." It was part of the performance, Earl, so we wouldn't shut off the money supply before the wedding. Suddenly, something heavy hit the door. A kick, probably. "Open up!" Julian roared. His voice cracked. "We're not done. You think you got rid of us with a piece of paper? You owe us compensation for moral damage, for fraud." "Yes," Alberta chimed in. "We'll sue. We'll take everything you own. The apartment, the summer cottage, everything. You're scammers. You gave us a defective product." I opened my eyes. There was no fear inside me, only fatigue and the desire to put down the final period. They wouldn't leave until they were convinced there was nothing left to take. They were like jackals. As long as they saw a scrap of meat, they would gnaw. I needed to show them the bone was clean. "Step back, Earl," I said, unhooking the chain. "You're going to let them in?" he asked, frightened. "No, I'm going out to them." I flung the door wide open. They froze. Julian with his leg raised for a kick, Alberta's face distorted with malice, Camille smearing mascara on her cheeks. Seeing my calm confidence, they were momentarily stunned. I stood on the threshold of my home in my simple house dress, yet I felt like I was in control. "You want money?" I asked softly. "We want justice!" Alberta shrieked, trying to squeeze past me into the apartment, but I blocked her path with my hand. The gesture was light, but authoritative. "Stop," I said. "You won't enter this apartment again, ever. The conversation will be here." "Justice?" I gave a wry smile. "Fine. Let's talk about justice." "Julian, your debts total $1.5 million. I saw the bank statement. Your mother mortgaged her family jewels back in '98. You are broke." Julian turned pale, his eyes darting back and forth. "Where did you get that? Slander?" "They are facts. And now, about my wealth, which you were counting on. You demanded a dowry," I continued, unrolling the paper. "Camille told you there was a large sum in her account, a nest egg we'd saved all our lives." "Yes!" Camille screamed, raising her tear-stained face. "You promised. You said you would transfer the money on the wedding day. Where is it? If you transfer it now, Julian will forgive me. We can start over." She looked at me with such pitiful hope that it almost physically hurt. She was ready to buy that scoundrel's love with our money. "The money was there," I nodded. $50,000. Everything your father and I saved over 40 years, denying ourselves everything. The sale of your grandmother's condo, my pension savings, my side jobs, everything was ready for the transfer. The transaction was scheduled for today for exactly 12 o'clock noon. Julian's eyes lit up with avarice. "Then transfer it. What are you waiting for? It's our money, the family capital." "It was there," I repeated, emphasizing the past tense. "The key word is was." I held out the receipt to them. "Look at the time," I said. 4:30 p.m., exactly half an hour after we drove away from your wedding gates. Julian snatched the receipt. Alberta and Camille clustered around him. "Hospice Aid Charity Fund," Julian read in a trembling voice. "Amount $50,000. Status executed." A deathly silence hung in the air. You could hear the light humming in the hallway lamp. "What is this?" Alberta whispered, not believing her eyes. You gave the money to a hospice?" "Yes," I answered. "An anonymous donation, non-refundable. The money is already gone from the account. We don't have it, and neither do you." "You're insane!" Julian screamed, crumpling the receipt and throwing it on the floor. "You old lunatic! You burned $50,000? Just like that?" "Not just like that." I looked him straight in the eye. "I bought my freedom and my husband's freedom with it. We are no longer the cash cows for your greed." Camille slid down the wall onto the dirty communal floor. She understood. Now she understood completely. The money was gone, the mansion was gone, the dowry was gone. All that remained were her husband's debts, her mother-in-law's hatred, and the closed door of her parents' home. "Mom," she moaned. "Why?" For the portrait on the gate, daughter, I answered. For being ashamed of us, for lying, for wanting to use us and throw us away. We just beat you to it. We threw away that baggage first. But what about us? Alberta wailed. We can't pay for a taxi. We have nowhere to go. The apartment is sealed by the bank. Those are your problems, I said. You're aristocrats. Figure something out. Maybe sell your titles. Oh, right. They're worthless. I took a step back into the apartment. Goodbye, I said. Julian lunged for the door, trying to get his foot in the gap. But Earl, my quiet, calm Earl, suddenly stepped forward. In his hand was a heavy cast-iron skillet, which he must have grabbed from the kitchen. He didn't raise it. He just held it as a weighty argument. Move your foot, he said quietly, but Julian jumped back as if scalded. I closed the door and turned the lock twice. I secured the chain. We stood in the entryway, listening as a new wave of hysteria rose outside the door. But now it was far away in another world, a world to which we no longer belonged. Our peace was broken not by their screaming, but by the wail of a siren. It drifted up from the street, cutting through the double-paned windows, and a minute later there was another knock on the door. This was a different knock, official, confident, heavy. Police, open up! Earl flinched and looked at me anxiously. I just nodded reassuringly. I had expected this. Our neighbors are vigilant, and the performance in the hallway was too loud even for a Saturday night. I opened the door. 2 police officers stood on the threshold. Young guys in uniform, tired and clearly annoyed by the call. Behind them, pressed against the wall, stood our guests. Julian looked like he'd just been in a brawl. Alberta Vance tried to maintain the remnants of grandeur, adjusting her crooked hat, and Camille just sat on the steps, covering her face with her hands. Ms. Carmichael? The senior sergeant asked, looking at his tablet. We got a call about a breach of the peace. Neighbors complaining about screaming and threats. Yes, this is my apartment, I answered calmly. And these people, I nodded at the huddled trio, were trying to force their way into my home against my will. They threatened violence and tried to extort money. That's a lie, Alberta shrieked, stepping forward. We're family. They're my daughter-in-law's parents. They stole our property. They're scammers. Officer, arrest them. They stole the money promised by the marriage agreement. The officer sighed wearily. Family disputes are the least favorite kind of call for any patrol officer. Ma'am, calm down. What agreement? Do you have documents? A verbal agreement, Alberta stated. They promised a dowry, $50,000, and now they say they gave it to some fund. It's theft. The sergeant looked at me. Sympathy was visible in his eyes. He must have already noticed the contrast between the calm, elderly couple in the doorway and the hysterical woman in the hat. Do you have any claims against these people? He asked me. I only have one request, officer, I said. Remove them from my apartment building. They are not registered here. They are not invited, and they are disturbing my peace and frightening my neighbors. But she's my daughter, Camille cried, lifting her head. Mom, how can you? Ma'am, the officer addressed Camille. Are you registered at this address? Camille hesitated. No, I moved out last week before the wedding to register at my husband's place. Then you have no right to be here, the sergeant cut in. All right, folks, time to go. Take your $50,000 arguments to court, but don't make a scene here. We're not going anywhere, Julian insisted. We have nowhere to go. You'll go to the station if you don't clear the premises right now. The officer's voice hardened. He placed his hand on his nightstick. Section 20.1 of the Penal Code, disorderly conduct. We'll file charges. Alberta Vance gave me a look filled with such venomous hatred that the air around her seemed to turn green. You will regret this, she hissed. You will die alone, and no one will bring you a glass of water. I'd rather die of thirst than drink from hands that hate me, I replied. The officers began escorting them toward the elevator. Julian still tried to yell something about lawyers. Camille sobbed out loud, clinging to the railing, but force was not on their side. The elevator doors closed, cutting off their cries. The building fell silent again. The sergeant lingered for a second. Sorry for the disturbance, he said, touching the brim of his cap. If they come back, call us immediately. We'll send a unit. Thank you, son, I smiled. I closed the door. This time, I didn't just lock it. I closed a chapter of my life. We returned to the kitchen. Earl sat down at the table and looked at the clock. "Almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon," he said aimlessly, "and we haven't eaten lunch." "And we won't," I replied, walking to the refrigerator. "We have more important things to do." "What things?" he asked, surprised. "Court? Lawyers?" "No, Earl. Travel." I took a bottle of vodka out of the freezer, the one Earl kept for a rainy day. But today wasn't a rainy day. Today was a day of liberation. I poured 2 shots. "Drink," I commanded, "to a new life." Earl drank it, choked, and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Viv, what are you talking about? What trip? We don't have money. You just said the hospice fund." I smiled slyly. I walked over to the desk where the folder with the wedding documents lay. The one I had shown Julian, but not completely. I hadn't lied to them, Earl. The $50,000 really did go to the fund. That was our burial money, our safety net, the one they wanted so badly. But I hadn't told them about something else. I pulled another sheet of paper from the folder. It was a bill of sale. "What is this?" Earl put on his glasses. "Remember the garage? The brick one downtown your father left you? The one we've been renting out as a storage unit for the past 10 years? Yeah. I sold it yesterday." Earl's eyes widened. "Sold it? Why?" "Because we don't need it. And we need the money, but not for Camille, and not for the fund." I laid a glossy brochure I'd been hiding in the same folder in front of him. The cover showed a luxurious train speeding through a snowy wilderness and an inscription in gold letters. "The Coast to Coast Dreamliner, New York to San Francisco, luxury class." Earl took off his glasses. His hands were shaking. "Viv, that's your dream. You've wanted to do that since we were young." "Our dream, Earl. Remember when we watched that show about the Pacific Coast? How you wanted to see the ocean, but that's crazy expensive." "The garage," I cut him off. "It cost exactly as much as 2 first-class sleeper tickets with full board and excursions. Departure is tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp from Grand Central Station." Earl was silent. He looked at the brochure, then at me, then at his empty glass. A tear rolled down his cheek. "But what about Camille?" he asked softly. "How can we just abandon her? She's going to be destitute." "She won't be destitute," I said harshly. "Grown adults with arms and legs don't become destitute. Let her learn to live. Let Julian go work as a moving man. Let Camille go be a waitress. I started by washing dishes, and the crown didn't fall off my head. It will be good for them. And we, Earl, we've done our part. We raised a daughter. We gave her an education. We tried to give her a wedding. She chose her path, and we will choose ours." I picked up the phone from the table. The screen blinked with a notification. One message from Frank. "Mansion is clean. Trash is gone. Your wine is safe in the cellar, waiting for better times. You are a rock, Vivian. I respect you." I smiled. "Pack your bags, Earl," I said, feeling an incredible lightness in my body. "We don't have much time. The train won't wait." Earl slowly stood up. He straightened his shoulders. For the first time all day, maybe in years, he looked not like a tired old man, but like a man with a purpose. "The fishing rods?" he asked suddenly, with boyish excitement. "Can I bring the fishing rods? We'll be near the Pacific." "You can," I laughed. "You can bring everything, Earl. Now we can do anything." Night fell over the city like a soft blanket, but in our apartment the lights were on in every window. We didn't sleep, we packed. It was a strange process, fitting an entire life into 2 suitcases. Usually, getting ready for a trip is a scramble of lists and the fear of forgetting something. But now, we moved in a meditative rhythm. We didn't take anything extra, just the essentials. Warm clothes for the mountain winds, comfortable shoes, and medication. Age, after all, was taking its toll. And a couple of books. I took a volume of poetry. Earl took a fisherman's guide. I opened the closet in the hallway to get the travel bag, and my gaze fell on the hanger. Hanging there was that dark, chocolate-colored dress I had worn that morning. It seemed alien to me now, like a costume from a play long since retired from the repertoire. I ran my hand over the fabric. No nostalgia, just a slight surprise. Was that really me? Was I really planning to stand in a crowd of arrogant guests, catching crumbs of attention from my own daughter? The phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Frank or Camille. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? I held the phone to my shoulder, folding a sweater. Vivian Carmichael? The voice was young, female, and uncertain. It's Lena, the administrator from the hospice. I'm sorry to call so late. We just saw the deposit for $50,000. It's a mistake. I paused. No, Lena, I said softly. It's not a mistake. It's a gift. The young woman started to cry. I could hear her sniffing. You have no idea. Our roof was leaking in the third wing. We didn't know how we were going to pay for pain medication next month. You saved us. Can we write about you? Can we put up a plaque? No, I said firmly. No plaques, no names. Just write, from parents who love. That's enough. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hung up. A warmth spread through my soul. Not the scorching pride I felt while organizing the wedding, but a quiet, steady warmth, like that of a wood stove on a winter day. This money didn't go toward caviar for people who despised us. It went toward silencing someone else's pain. This was right. Earl came out of the bedroom. He was already changed into his traveling clothes, comfortable corduroy pants and a flannel shirt. In his hands, he held the fishing rods in their case. Ready? I asked. Ready, he nodded. Viv, what about the picture? The one from the gate? I froze. I had completely forgotten about it. As we drove away from the mansion, obeying some impulse, I had asked Earl to stop, gotten out, and ripped that damned sheet off the gate, crumpled it, and thrown it into the back seat. Then at home, I had mechanically carried it into the apartment with my purse. Where is it? I asked. In the trash can, Earl replied. I put it there when you were talking to the police, but maybe we should keep it for memory, as a lesson? I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet door under the sink. On top of the potato peels lay that wad of glossy paper. The red letters, "This pair not allowed," showed through the creases. I looked at it for a minute, remembering that moment at the gate, the cold in my chest, Camille's laugh on the balcony. No, I said, slamming the door shut. We don't take trash into a new life. Let it rot here. That's the past, Earl. We're going to the future. We left the apartment at 5 o'clock in the morning. The city was empty and clean. A taxi was already waiting outside the building. The driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, silently loaded our suitcases. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the windows. I knew it was dark there. I knew the apartment keys were with the concierge, along with a note for the realtor. Rent out long-term, transfer the money to the card. We wouldn't be coming back here soon. Maybe never. The station greeted us with the smell of coffee and diesel, the scent of travel. Our train, huge and gleaming, stood on track 1. The conductor in her starched uniform smiled as she checked our tickets. Carmichaels, welcome aboard. Your cabin is ready. Tea or coffee right away? Tea, Earl said. With lemon and in a proper glass holder, please. The real thing. We stepped into the compartment. It was luxurious. Velvet seats, a carpet runner, a small table with a lamp under a green shade. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. The train pulled out. Gently, almost imperceptibly, the platform slid backward. Kiosks, people rushing for commuter trains, the gray bulk of New York City floated past. I took out my phone. The final act. I opened my contacts. Camille, Julian, Alberta. I selected all of them, pressed block, then went into settings and chose change number. I had removed the old SIM card in the taxi and thrown it into the trash bin at the station entrance. A new card, bought yesterday, was already in the slot. No one would find us. No one would call asking for money. No one would accuse us of being cold-hearted. We had disappeared. Earl sat across from me, looking out the window. The train picked up speed. The city ended, giving way to forests and fields. Viv, he said, not turning his head. You know, we're free. Yes, Earl. And you know what I regret? He turned to me. There were tears in his eyes, but his face was lit up with a smile. What? That we didn't see that sign 10 years earlier? I laughed, easily, brightly, like I did when I was young. Better late than never. Pour the tea, old man. San Francisco is waiting. The train sped west, carrying us away from fake weddings, ungrateful children, and debts we didn't owe. Ahead were thousands of miles of forests, great rivers, mountains, and the Pacific Ocean. Ahead was the life we deserved. And this time, there was a completely different sign hanging on the gates of that life. Welcome, entry only for the happy. That's the story, my dear listeners. A story about how a parent's love is boundless, but even it has a limit of self-respect. And sometimes, to find happiness, you just have to close the door to the past and get on a train headed for a dream. Thank you for being with me and listening to the end. If this story touched you, please support the channel. Subscribe, like, and write in the comments how you would have acted if you were Vivian and Earl. Could you have forgiven a daughter like that? I'm very interested in your opinion. And if you want to hear another true life story full of unexpected twists, click the button that just appeared on your screen. Until next time.